Our first speaker is Maria Garcia-Florenciano from the University of Leeds. So we'll be talking about the opportunities for learners to engage in authentic language use and collaborative communicative tasks. So I'll let you, Maria.
Thank you. I work in the Department of Spanish, Portuguese and Latin American Studies, and I picked up and coordinate the second year language module and a couple of language electives offered in the department. The University of Leeds has defined some core threads to be integrated in all programs, and two of those threads are global and cultural insight and employability. We are also encouraged to make very efficient use of digital learning space and to promote whenever possible interdisciplinary collaboration so that we can offer students the opportunity to broaden their studies beyond their own discipline. In the department, a very important resource that we have is the collaboration with the Spanish Institute, Instituto Cervantes. Apart from providing tutors for the language modules, we also offer a cultural program whereby reputed speakers from the Hispanic world come to the department and address our students on their area of expertise. And it was in this context where the idea for our project was born. And the idea was to offer students the opportunity to carry out a real-life task with professional and social relevance. And that task would consist of interviewing those guest speakers coming to the university to take part in the cultural events. Participation in the project was offered to second-year students of Spanish, giving them an opportunity to develop their oral and written skills, and participation in the project was part of their autonomous learning portfolio, which is an assessed component in the language module. By interviewing these speakers, they will have to carry out some research on the area of expertise, therefore engaging with international issues, and carrying out a real task. They will have to develop some key skills, therefore enhancing employability. The way we promoted and introduced the cross-disciplinary collaboration element was by getting the students from the Communication Studies Institute to film and edit the interviews. So that's how we get to our project, which is called Personalidades. It was all carried out within the environment of the VLE. It was set up as an organization. And the objectives of the project were to carry out research and produce an introductory text on the interviewees and the area of expertise, text in English and in Spanish, to write up the questions, to produce interview scripts in the target language, to conduct the interviews in the target language as well. Afterwards, they will have to write a report reflecting on the learning and on the process, to finally publish the work as an open educational resource. We had 4 interviews to be carried out. We had 2 experts on gender and identity. We had a acclaimed poet, a Spanish poet, and we were also interviewing the director of the Spanish Institute in Manchester and Leeds. We had 8 participants in the project, and they were organized into pairs, each pair in charge of 1 interview. To organize the groups, I made use of the sign-up list tool, where I set up 4 lists, 1 for each interview, and the students were free to choose who they wanted to interview. There were 2 places in each list, so the students at the same time were choosing who they would be working with. This is a screen print of the list. The resources were also made available within the organization of the VLE. The beauty of the system is that it allows you to check who, when, how often, basically how often and and when and if they had accessed the materials that were made available. These materials consisted of some tips and techniques on interviewing. To get access to these resources, I contacted David Lee in the Institute of Communication Studies, and he recommended these videos by the BBC that are used by students on broadcasting journalism. And we also had specific language exercises that we took from the Spanish Institute online course. These exercises have free access, and the ones that we use in particular are specifically designed to work on interviews as a specific form of interaction. They are multimedia, they are interactive, and quite appealing to the students. The channel of communication was mostly discussion boards, and to address the possible difficulties that could come up by using this channel, there were some strategies in place. The first one was to provide an incentive to get the students to contribute. For that reason, 50% of the grade was assigned to discussion board contribution, but the nature of the task, being a real task, knowing that they had to perform, proved to be incentive enough for the students. It was also important to set the rules for participation. In our case, it was very important that the students had always to contribute in the target language. All contributions had to be made in Spanish, but they knew that they were not being assessed on the language used. It was also important that they had to contribute, and also that they had to be nice and respectful of each other. Because it was assessed, it was very important that the assessment criteria was very clearly stated from the beginning. The students were not being assessed on the content of the contribution, but they were being assessed on the quality of their interaction. They were also being assessed on the quantity of their interaction. So they had to participate enough and with enough consistency. I have to say that there was no problem whatsoever in this respect. And to get started and to make sure that the students were familiar with the tools, we set up a very easy task at the beginning where the students basically just had to introduce themselves and explain why they had chosen to interview one specific speaker. The students had two different forums that they could contribute to. There was one general forum for all participants, where the main threads were discussions on the materials to start with. They had to access the materials and tell the others what they had found. But also, very importantly, they had to agree on the format for the interviews. It was up to them to decide how long they would be, how many questions they would ask, how many people would be carrying out the interview, if there would be an introduction or not. Also, they had to maintain some meetings with the students of communication studies. Not all the participants could attend the meeting, so those people who attended the meetings had to then report back to the group through the forum. The students, once they carried out their interview, they were very eager to go back to the forum and tell everybody how it went. But also those that hadn't had their interview yet were very excited about finding out how it went, getting tips, getting advice from those that had already been through that experience. They also had to decide on the length, the content, the style, the structure of their introductory texts. As well, the students, each pair, they had their specific forum used for distribution of work. They had to decide who was doing what, and to share ideas, useful resources, links that they had found to prepare for the interviews and the texts. All the students had access to those specific group forums as well. They could see them, but they could not contribute. To write the scripts for the interviews and to write the introductory texts, the students were using wikis. Again, all participants could see and comment on all wikis, but only members of the team could edit. And the tutor would, in this case myself, I was commenting mostly on language use. I wasn't getting involved on what the content was going to be or which way it should be taken in the process. Again, from an assessment point of view, it's very interesting that the tool allows you to see the percentage of work completed by each student. And also, the history page allows you to browse the students' work to see their individual contributions. By clicking on View Diff, you can compare the previous version of the text, and it's highlighted in different colors what the student has deleted, what they have written, and what the original text was. Another tool that was used was announcements to communicate with the whole group whenever we had set a new thread on the forum, or when we had information about where we were going to be carrying out the interview, so anything that was relevant for the whole group. An email was used to address or to contact specific groups that had been created through the lists or individual users. And that's how we get to the outputs of this project. As I said before, the students had to write a report reflecting on how the project went for them. And for that reflection, they had to address the different language activities that they had been involved while participating in the project. I have included here some quotes from their reports. And it's interesting that with regards to oral reception, it was all mostly to do with their interviews themselves. It was very important to them that the questions had to be related to what the person had said, so they had to make sure that they understood what the interviewer was saying. And with the nerves as well, it was very easy to be thinking of what am I going to say next, and forget to listen to the interview. But the students, they had their own initiative and they looked for their own resources, and I found it very interesting that one of the students went to the length of looking for videos available on YouTube, just so that they could listen to the interviewee beforehand and get used to the accent. With regard to oral production and interaction, again, it was mostly the interview itself. And here we can see how the motivation was provided by it being a real task. It was a real project and the consequences were real. We wanted to impress Rosa Medina. Also the fact that they had researched about the personality that they were interviewing. In this case, a very well-known Spanish poet, Manuel Rico. I feel great respect for him and his work, and I was very nervous to interview him, but I ended up having a very interesting discussion. It was very interesting and very useful that the students had access to the interviewees for about 20 minutes before they actually carried out the interview. It put their minds at rest, they relaxed a bit, and also they got to know the person they were interviewing. The fact that they were being filmed, speaking in front of the camera, it was an important element as well. And knowing that they couldn't rehearse it, it was beyond their control, it was a real task, you had to be ready to improvise. Written reception, again, because of that motivation, they didn't want to embarrass themselves, they had to be up to the job. They did a really extensive research. They went through an incredible amount of different types of texts, just to make sure that they were prepared. With regards to written production, they found very useful the wiki tool, specifically the information that they were getting from peer feedback. They found that the type of exercise that they were carrying out was very transferable as well. And even when they knew that the written test was going to be assessed, that was not the main reason why they were making the effort. It was because the text would be published. Written interaction in the forum, I was worried about them participating, and I should have been worried about me being able to keep up with them. It was sometimes 2 or 3 times a day that each of them were participating, they really had to make decisions. They really needed to finalize how many questions, what they were going to wear, things like that. And at the beginning, they felt a bit uncomfortable with the tool. They were thinking about Maria is reading all this, but they were doing it so often, and also to a very specific, with a very specific objective. They became natural. They forgot that they were being assessed. They forgot that they were being watched, and it became a very natural tool to use. I'm not sure if it was because of the language barrier, or if it was because of the nature of the tool that we were using, but they really had problems sometimes finalizing decisions, to the point that we had to call a meeting where we all had an agenda on points that we had to set. Basically, we had to make decisions that day. I don't know if it was the language barrier really, that they were being too nice to each other, and they found it hard to be very direct, or if it was the forum, where it's not an asynchronic device or tool, so it doesn't really allow for people to face each other as directly as maybe it was needed. And something that I hadn't predicted, and it was an interesting result of introducing the interdisciplinary element, was that the students were performing tasks of mediation. Something that normally, unless you are in a specifically translation or interpreting module, students don't get to perform. But students had to carry out meetings with the communication students and then report back in Spanish, whereas those meetings had been carried out in English. But also, during the interview itself, they had the cameraman there who didn't speak any Spanish, and the poets who didn't speak any English, and they were the ones in charge of mediating. And they found that interesting, and they really enjoyed it because they could do it. The other obvious product is the videos and the text that they have written. Unfortunately, I don't have yet the final product because the communication students were very busy during January, and they promised that by February they would have the videos ready. But I have a very short clip.
Muy reputadas. Todas relacionadas con el género en la...
Y es importante que también contribuyamos al think tank, laboratorio de ideas, de estas nuevas
Sample. But it doesn't stop here. We can take the project further. The first thing that we will be doing will be making the videos and the text available from the departmental website and the departmental Facebook page. And we will also be using the videos during the University Open Days. To make them more available, I'm trying to get the interpreting and translation students to provide subtitles for the videos. But this year it has been run as a small-scale project within the departments of the Spanish and Portuguese. But the idea is to make it available to the whole school next year with the objective of building up an audiovisual resource bank in different languages. In the third year, it could become a school-wide module standing on its own right. Challenges to these objectives could be securing regular and reliable sources of interviewees, and also to make sure that there is availability and commitment of communication studies students. Basically, at the moment, the only thing they are getting out of it is extra practice. It's a product that they can include in their portfolio. They have been really nice, but my fear is that they might not be that committed. Also, the language team in this Institute of Cervantes has offered to create and develop activities linked to the topic of the interviews. There will be exercises pitched at different levels and mainly intended for classroom use, and these activities will be distributed to schools and colleges through routes into languages. And by uploading the text and videos in Handbox, the product will be accessible to the wider community. And that was the project, so have any questions?
Thank you, Maria. We have time for a few questions, I think, so whether we need the microphone or whether we can all hear. Who would like to ask a question?
I speak quite loud.
If anyone doesn't speak loudly, can you just...
Maria, I like so much the whole thing you've done, because it really represents what we should be doing now, which is integrating, doing very relevant tasks with students. You know, something that is real, not even it looks real, is real for them. It's absolutely spot on all aspects, with the technology, with everything. So I was very impressed, and I actually think this is an example of something that is not only relevant for languages, but for many other subjects. So there are lots of disciplines that can learn from this kind of practice. I have a question about, you mentioned the challenges about recruiting film communication studies students. Did you have any issue about recruiting the personalities, the poets and writers themselves, or they all were for it?
They were all up for it, they were very happy, and I have to say that they were so impressed with the students. I think that they arrived there thinking the first thing to our advantage is that they already come knowing that they are coming to address the students. So they come with that attitude and they are very approachable. But also, I think that they were expecting students to ask them, so where are you from, what did you do? And when they were asking them specific questions, proving that they had done extensive research on the topic, they were very, very happy, and they're all looking forward to have an access to the product, to the video, and they want to include them in their blogs. So I think that it was a very, very gratifying experience for everybody involved. So they were very nice.
But were there enough personalities as well for students?
That's the problem.
Right.
So basically we will need to secure different links, so we cannot do it only with Spanish Institute. At the moment I'm contacting everybody in the department. Are you bringing anybody? Do you have any seminars? But I think that we need to think beyond that. So if we could develop links, for example, with the International Film Festival happening in Leeds, there is the bigger festival in Manchester that has a strong link with the Spanish Institute. So we have to look into opportunities like that. But again, I have to say that the project was assessed, but it was assessed on the participation on the discussion boards, the text and the reflection. But the actual interview was not assessed, just in case it didn't happen.
Right.
More questions? Yes.
I would echo that, actually. I think this is a fantastic project. So well done for that. You mentioned about the students and interaction on the discussion board. Did you? Did you put students in charge, or did you say to them? You said they didn't make decisions. So would you sort of say, okay, Fred, you make the decisions. You're the this, you're the that, or did you leave that entirely up to them?
I left it entirely up to them, because they were in pairs and because they had a deadline when they had to carry out the interview. There was that pressure. They knew they had to make a decision. There was the option of setting a moderator, but I thought that because they were all going to be assessed on the same terms, it wouldn't have been fair to put that responsibility on one specific person. Also, the project was quite short. It was running from October to December, beginning of December, so there was no time to be able to make all the students moderators at some point. So basically there was no moderator.
Can I just ask one quick question? How much work was this for you? Yeah, because I mean, it sounds like a huge amount of work for you to track it all and keep everything on track.
I was going to bed with my laptop to make sure that I was checking all the contributions every day. But I think that in the future, an easy way of getting out of that kind of pressure is to communicate to the students. I'm going to check the forum on Fridays. So you know that I will be checking that. If there is anything very urgent that you need to contact me about, send me an email. Otherwise, I will be on the forum every Friday or every, whenever you allocate a specific time. Otherwise, it could be very time consuming. But it was so interesting.
Yeah, I can see.
How many students did you have doing this activity, and were they all students doing the Spanish and Latin American Studies degree because I'm from a language center, so we have non-language specialist students who are not really a degree of Spanish or subject area. So I was just wondering how I could adapt these to students who may be just coming from marketing or sports science or all these different disciplines, and I could do it. So that's one of my questions.
It's not so much to do with Spanish being their main discipline. It's with the level of Spanish and their proficiency. They were at B2 class level. So by being at that level, they had access to all resources in Spanish with no problem, and they were able to carry out the interview. It was only 80 students, but when we're thinking about making it into a module available to the whole School of Modern Languages, we were thinking of having common lectures or workshops, working on interview techniques, and then specific tutorials or organization on the BLE is language specific. But there are things that they could do together.
I was just interested, do you think that the fact that they were interviewing well-known people was motivating? And that ordinary people...
I think that it was important for the project because of the name of the project. It had been set out like that from the beginning. But I think that once they got involved with the project and knowing that it was going to be available to everybody, that it was going to be filmed, they were saying, my mum is going to watch this. It was a lot of motivation, and they got quite involved with the personality itself. So if you create a different sort of expectations by saying we are going to be interviewing normal people, but maintain the visible aspect of it by publishing it, you will still get the same type of engagement, I would think.
Maybe time for one more quick question before we go to the next speaker.
Can we just talk about the technicalities, really? What platform did you use? Was Blackboard 9, okay, so the university.
And there are tools that have already been used. But, I mean, there are many more things that you could incorporate, and there are many reports that you can generate from it. And from the assessment side of things, that's quite important that you have the documents in case you need to support the mark that you have given.
So from the point of view of the language teaching, you didn't have to add anything more just for them to complete these tasks because they had the level which was good enough.
And basically this is part of the autonomous learning portfolio. So basically they have the language classes, and this is some extra inputs and involvement with the language that they are doing outside the classes.
Thank you very much for that.
discussions evolved around those materials, and they were very practical. We had, per year, we used to run them for a couple of 5 fixed slots in the summer, 5 weeks, and we would have 200 students on them. That was 2005. 2011, we decided to roll this model out further and offer a pre-arrival course to all our international students coming to the University of Southampton. Now, we get about 4,000 new students every year coming in October. So what we did was we spam email. We threw away the idea of a fixed course, fixed slot, because that was a major problem for students because they're busy sorting out visas and this, that, and the other. And we opened it from April, about the time they were applying, getting their offers, through to October. And we also took out the tutoring, because we had problems with the tutoring element, because students were simply asking the same questions over and over again. Major problem in the middle of the summer, there are very few spare tutors to tutor an online course. Yeah. Everyone's involved in face-to-face teaching. So we took out the tutoring. So we put the materials in there. We decided to throw out the discussion forum because we didn't have a tutor. We used something called a social wall. I'm talking about it tomorrow at 2:30, the whole thing. So we used a social wall. And what we did was we spam emailed them through every couple of weeks. Any students went into the university system, found the students who applied, spam emailed them, free course, find out what it's going to be like studying at the University of Southampton. And we gave them a generic login. We put the course out through Moodle. We created a plugin so that when the students used the same generic login, they got a little set up an account, set of questions. This allowed us, once they had their personal login, to track what they were doing. 2011, we ran it for the first time. We had 1,600 students did that. They created an account, responded to the invitation, created an account, did the course to varying amounts, because as you've talked about, individuals get different things out of courses. Last summer, we ran it, we had over 2,000 students do it, so we're getting better at it in those ways. But the social wall, what happened was, the students used the social wall, and probably none of you will turn up at my presentation tonight. Students used the social wall to exchange their email accounts, their QQ if they were Chinese, Facebook if they were UK or American based. They exchanged and this was the hunch we had, they exchanged their contact details and they got in contact with each other outside the course. And the social wall was good for this. Ironically, then they started actually trying to use the social wall to discuss a bit. This was all without a tutor, but then no tutoring. So they started trying to discuss. At that point, we had to add a discussion forum, a run-of-the-mill academic, rather dry discussion forum, to allow the students to talk. And I don't know if any of you have visited the student room, which is a kind of web-based open thing. It began, I've been sort of looking at how it developed over the summer, and it pretty much models how the student room is. So the threads that students create are students from Uganda looking for other students from East Africa, or students wanting to share a house rather than live in halls, looking for other students to share a house. So really practical things. And they created their own threads and they went off and they discussed on their own. So completely without tutor. So that was our experience of an online course that involved a lot of students, but the satisfaction levels were quite high. We gave them a feedback form. We had about 8% of the 2,000 actually sent us feedback, and it was very good. I mean, they felt they got a lot out of it, and you can imagine the students in that situation. So a lot about confidence building, making contacts.
Shared interest is the key word. Shared interest. Yeah.
So from their standpoint, they got a lot of interest in the course, and from our point of view, it was a successful course. But it didn't involve much tutoring. I can't really say hand on heart there was a lot of sort of co-constructing of knowledge in there, but there was a lot of exchange of information. So for me, that was a kind of Duke different online. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, and I'm looking for ways to actually, maybe next year, add tutoring with. We added links to Facebook accounts and so on. To actually add something that's a little bit teacher-led and maybe does develop some particular threads that students want to talk about in depth with a tutor. But I'm still figuring out how to do that. But that was our experience anyway.
Mookish, isn't it?
I think that's the way we have to go.
Can I make a comment on what you said? That one of the challenges when you do things like this in the open is tracking what's happening. Because people exchange their email addresses, their Facebook accounts and whatever, and then the discussion moves elsewhere, and then you don't know it's happening. So how do you show that it's been a success, that the students have been in contact, that have been talking to each other? You've lost that information because it's just happening elsewhere. It's just an acknowledgement that it is happening, you know.
Yeah.
But
well, you can get it from the feedback form.
yeah.
So,
But then, you know, if you've got 8% of people who return the feedback form, I'm sure there's
yes,
a hell of a lot of other stuff happening. You know, they've met on Skype, they've talked by email, and we don't get.
That's a big challenge,
It's
really.
a challenge.
Is particularly for institutions, because
Yeah,
these
exactly.
are the
Because you will have to then justify to the institution, I need to continue doing this course because it's been successful, and they'll say, well, where's the discussions, where's the, you know.
Okay, so we just move on to our, we probably move on to lunch. So
yeah, I suppose one of my key interests in this is actually related to the open access to research debate, and one of the things that's increasingly concerned me over the last couple of years is how restricted academic research is to the outside world. How in most things that we publish are behind paywalls. If you want to buy some of my work, if you're a member of the public, you have to pay $25 for a 15-page article. Please don't, and email me if you do want to read anything I've written. This is highly concerning me. The way the debate has sort of evolved in recent last few months has actually concerned me even more with a lot of it, this preference for gold open access, publisher pays. I don't think it's any good if people can't participate in the publishing of research. So it's no good just having people being able to read what other people have done if they can't afford or access to participate. And this links very much with the MOOC situation, is that you've got what access to research do these students have? Our regular students, as a member of staff or a student at a university, you'll get a library card, you'll have access to all the online journals and resources, the library. And I think one of the connections I want to make is that what are the students on these MOOCs actually getting? Are they able to access translation journals? Are they able to have access to the OU library, for example? So in that sense, although these are seen as democratic and participatory, those students do not have the same access to knowledge that regular students are face-to-face and otherwise registered students do. So I think that's an important link that's perhaps not being made as much as I would like.
It's one of the criticisms that has been made of this massive MOOCs, is it like second best? Is it just for the unwashed masses? Somebody wrote the other day, is this just good enough for the unwashed masses who can't make it to Berkeley and Stanford and Harvard?
And of course, the risk with the X MOOCs, where it's you get what I dish up to you, rather than the connected ones where it's like you can all put something in, but it's also what can they put in. So there's lots of tensions there. Oh, right, Vicky has a question, comment?
Well, I wasn't. It was just I was going to come back to your definition of a MOOC. If it's about content, then what John was saying is absolutely right, access to research and knowledge and so on. But if the definition is about sharing and collective knowledge and individual gain, then the rest doesn't matter. It's actually enhanced learning rather than access to knowledge. So it comes back, I mean, you're absolutely right, of course, but if it's about what you can do together, then perhaps it doesn't matter quite as much.
The Open Lab, at the OU, you've got a great situation with the Open Lab because part of the policy of the OU is to use it as an experimental space. So obviously doing the MOOC series is in line with OU policy. Has there been any pressure put on you or any discussions about using it? I mean, it is a marketing tool for the OU courses. But has there been any direct link between OU selling courses and Open Lab and your work?
Not really. I mean, we just actually thought maybe this is a good opportunity to find out about this, because maybe we are going to do translation studies at postgraduate level one day. You know, it was more for our own benefit. There's no course hooked onto it that we could have sent anybody to.
And in fact, when we started it, FutureLearn hadn't even been announced. So we were just thinking, gosh, the OU's not doing anything about this new situation. Let's do something
let's
ourselves. You know? Obviously, it was all cooking in the background.
Thank you. I'm kind of interested in what the relationship is between sort of free open education resources movement and open courses, because I'm not entirely clear that the content is as open as we might think OERs are. And actually, what you're reporting is a lot of people are using these courses more like they might use OERs, so they're picking and mixing.
Yes.
So, you know, what's the point of the course part? So I suppose that's just something that I'm not sure you know what the answers are, but
OER has a sort of same restriction regarding access. It's no good, you know, put things in the handbox like a reading lists and things like that on certain topics. Well, if people can't access those reading lists, it's absolutely no use to them whatsoever.
I need more on the, you know, you can take that, you can do something with it, you can put it somewhere else and share it, you know, with the wider world. You know, is that something that institutions are going to be putting Creative Commons licenses in their course materials, which allow that kind of freedom of sharing, because that is at part of what OER is supposed to be about. But it's more like saying you can come into our space, you can use the material, but we can't necessarily.
When you do a book, by definition, what you put up there has to be an OER. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to put it up there.
Well, true.
You know, it has to be based on OER. I mean, we used an open translation manual, which is published as an open resource. We couldn't use an open translation book, because then we would be breaking the law.
But anything that you created yourself.
What we created, I think the whole course has got a CC BY license. But you know, the resources we created, the recordings of the synchronous sessions, they were all up there for people to.
But it's not generally the case with XMOOCs. That's the point.
No,
that's my question. Is that? We need to wrap it up.
Thank you. Thank you.